Let's start then, Derek, please. Will you press the
Right,
button?
I've pressed the go live button and it now says you are live.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody to this November meeting of the Schools Forum. Just a few of the usual reminders from me to start with, please. The meeting's being conducted on Zoom in accordance with Bracknell Forest Council's remote meeting protocols and procedures. And as such, it's open to members of the press and public, and the meeting's being recorded and live streamed, as Derek's just pressed the button for us. Can I ask you to keep your microphones off so that we don't get any background fuzzy noise, but preferably keep your camera on so that we can see who's around and so on. We won't be displaying the papers on the screen as usual. Everybody should have a copy of the papers. Derek sent those out some time ago to us, and they've been published on the website, on the Bracknell Forest website, so they're available to everybody. And just to say that each of the recommendations that we consider today involve all members of the forum, so we don't need any complicated voting procedures this afternoon. Joanna's here to clerk the meeting for us today. Joanna, will you do the attendance register for us, please?
Yes, so
Can you do that,
take that just from
screen?
what I've got on screen? Yeah.
Okay. Have you got any apologies for this afternoon, Joanna?
Yes, I do. So I've got apologies from Jenny Baker, Karen Davies and Liz Savage. Also got an apology from Richard Stock, but he said he will hopefully join after 5 p.m.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. Can we just deal with a membership issue before we get into the main agenda? I'm not quite sure where the right place to do this is, but let's do it now. Debbie Smith from Sandhurst has indicated that this is her last meeting on the forum. Perhaps for a while, Debbie, you might come back in some other form for us. But as Sandhurst is converting to an academy before the next meeting of the forum in March, Debbie needs to stand down today. And on behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank Debbie for her contribution over many years to the work of the forum. So thanks, Debbie. I'm presuming, Paul, that will mean we need to do something to the membership structure.
Yes, that's right, Martin. Yes, Martin, that's right. What we intend to do is to review that structure before the next meeting on the 10th of March and come forward with some proposals on some changes, because that structure should reflect the proportion of pupils in academy schools and maintained schools. So obviously that's changing somewhat. So we'll look at what that should be looking like. And a very, very quick review of that indicates there should be one more academy representative and one less maintained school representative in the secondary sector. But obviously we just need to run through that properly. And to say that we'll come to that on March, and then we will go through a process of seeking to fill all the vacant posts. We have a few vacancies at the moment, so we do that at the same time and try and get every post filled for September. That's our plan at the moment.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're welcome to stay, Debbie. I think that's the message from.
And that's fine. But I think I'd like to open up to other segments.
Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, we need to go through.
Stuart is already on the forum, and we'd be part of the same trust. And I know there's nothing to stop that, but I think having two secondaries in the same trust might not be a balance. But yeah, let's see. You might be inundated.
Okay. Thanks, Paul, for that. Then. So, can we move to declarations of interest, please, for this afternoon? Members are asked to disclose any pecuniary or affected interest in respect of any item on the agenda today. Are there any declarations of interest for this afternoon? I reckon there should be 2. Is that right? Keith, do you need to declare an interest?
Now, I've read through the papers today, which is actually quite unlikely, Martin. I couldn't see where I need to declare an interest. So can you point me to where I do need to declare this interest?
I would suggest you might need to declare an interest in the local authority budget paper, which has got a capital programme associated with Garfield School.
Well, let me declare that interest. I think it's safer to declare it than not.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Gareth, you need to declare an interest as well, please.
Yeah, I mean, the interest I declare is that I'm a governor of both Garfield College and Warfield CV Primary School. And of course, there's some specific recommendations around Warfield CV Primary School that are being discussed, and to confirm that with Paul's support, that actually Paul Bettison, the leader of the council, will be taking any decisions relate to that particular item if, as and when appropriate.
Okay, thanks. Is there anything else this afternoon? No, thank you very much. So can we deal with the minutes of our meeting on the 9th of December? First of all, can we agree that they're a correct record? So we're really happy that they're a correct record of the meeting. I have to say, Joanna, you do great minutes for us. So thank you for that. But we accept them as a correct record then for this afternoon. There's only one noted matter arising, and that's in minute 212, which is an action for Chris Taylor. Paul, I don't know whether Chris is obviously not here this afternoon. Paul, can you update us?
Yeah, Chris is yet to tell me whether he's done that yet, and I don't see that type of correspondence, so I'm not sure. So I will ask him again, and yeah, obviously we'll report back at the next time. But I can't give you a precise update now, I'm afraid.
Okay, and I mean just perhaps not quite arising from that, but can I ask if the SEN sufficiency document was created? Do you know that, Paul?
That will be coming with in March, when there'll be a capital strategy and school places plan. That's the intention to do that, and that will have information on SEN. I don't know if Cheryl would like to add to that, because that's part of your portfolio, Cheryl. I don't know are you happy with that explanation?
Yeah, it's at the stage of, we're just tying up all the loose ends, we're working around it. I think March will be the time it comes. Our next meeting's March the 10th, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm just looking at this around the action for Chris. And the query was incorrect information being included in the presentation shared with head teachers. It referred to an old version of the locality plan, the local plan. And Chris, I do know, has picked up on this. And as we all know, Chris of old is very efficient in what he does. So he has noted it and has made, he will ensure that the correct one is included in that strategic document for the March 10th, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Are there any other matters arising that members have got from the minutes? Anything else? I'd like to raise something, please. There's a couple from me. I have to confess that I'm a bit surprised that there's no HNB update at this meeting. I thought that we'd asked for regular updates, and we've not had anything for a short while. And I have to say, I'm even more disappointed this afternoon that there's not a high needs block funding paper for 2022-23 on the agenda. We're dealing with the early years stuff in a minute. We're dealing with the schools block funding. in a second, and the CSSB funding in a few minutes. And that leaves the high needs block paper and funding for 22-23 to the March meeting again. And on behalf of the forum, we've previously expressed real concern about that because it doesn't give us an opportunity to discuss the budgetary implications. We're presented effectively with a fait accompli at the March meeting. And we've previously said that that's not good enough. So under the minutes, which I'm going to raise the matter arising in a minute, I'd like to express my disappointment with that. I don't know whether other members of the forum agree with me, but we've just slipped back into our old ways, it seems, and I don't think that's good enough, quite frankly. No other comments. Okay, well, I've made my point. So the next thing is...
well, no, if you want a point, then I second what you said. I think if that strengthens, I second everything that you've said, that it is disappointing, yes.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay, so just going to the minutes then. I mean, it's an associated point, but I'd just like to ask where we are with the banding matrix. I know that was put off, discussions about that were put off because of the local authority SEND inspection. But are we close to implementing something? When's it going to come into play? What's the plans? I'm guessing this is a question for you, Cheryl, really, please.
Yeah, that's fine, Martin. So the banding matrix that we've been given, that Jenny has provided, it's originally from Slough Council. Jenny presented at the High Needs Block subgroup working party. We looked at it, then following that, there was a demonstration for the SEND team to look at. The descriptors were then taken away and they are being worked on currently by Mandy Wimbush and Veronica, the learning support and ASD teachers, because they're actually working through their quite detailed descriptors. That piece of work is still happening at the moment, and the plan is for that to be completed, and then it will be handed to Paul Clark, because so far Jenny was quite clear that the actual funding, the amounts of funding were not to be included in the matrix. It was getting the descriptors right and agreeing on the number of levels. We've had a number of meetings where we've gone through that back and forth, and it's been well received by the high needs, the subgroup. So it's with those officers currently. When they've completed it, it will then go to Paul Clark, who will then work on the modelling of the finance for each level. Then it's going back to the subgroup. The aim is to have that completed probably end of February, beginning of March. The problem will be in the methodology of how it's implemented, because there are 1,163 children alone just on EHCPs, and to change them over in one moment is a huge piece of work. And so I've been discussing with colleagues and with various heads as to whether it could be incorporated into the annual review of each EHCP, because then you are looking at the individual child or young person, you've got all the professional officers involved, and then you can make sure that the agreed banding matrix will be appropriate for that child. So that's, at the moment, those papers are with those officers. I did a check yesterday. They are still working on them. And the plan will be to get it done and start implementing probably March, April. So that was shared with head teachers on Monday of this week at meetings. So head teachers are fully updated.
Okay, thank you. And can I just ask a couple of other questions? You presented us with 6 streams of activity, Cheryl, at our meeting
Yes.
in November. I'm just wondering, well,
Some
I'll be
updates for
specific.
you, Martin. Would
Sorry?
you like some updates? I've
I think
some
it's good
updates.
to hear an update on all 6. And
Yes,
hopefully we
yes.
can have a proper update at our March meeting.
Yes, that's fine. But so the first one was governance framework and process. So Capital One project, there are 2 project managers working on that. There are 3 phases to that. The first one was to put all the young people's details into the database. The second one was to test out the system. And the third one was to proof the system to see where there are gaps in what we require of the module to be effective. So that piece of work finishes at the end of March. It's on track currently. And well, I was going to say I'm reassured, but I don't know if I'm reassured, but I have been informed that from end of March, beginning of April, that we will be able to leave all these spreadsheets behind and actually use the system. But there will be training required for schools because the system will then allow SENCOs and obviously staff with usernames and access to actually go in the system, monitor where the process is, upload information. And there is also a parent portal as well where parents can view. So we do need to make sure it's running well and we do need to do training. So that's well in hand and it's on track. So I don't know if anyone had any questions around that for me.
No,
Okay.
that's the sort of thing I was hoping for.
Building relationships. We've been delivering SENCO meetings on a regular basis and working with the localities. We've been developing the meetings with head teachers. And Monday, there were due to be 3 locality meetings, which I hijacked, I'm afraid, and I have apologised, just to make sure that all schools were fully informed of developments. What I want to share with colleagues today, those who are not head teachers, that the phase of plan for the SEND service, last term we had lots of strategic ideas, concepts, systems. This term, it's about embedding those systems, getting the EHCP process correct and running smoothly. The panels, having clear panel meetings, set at the right level, with clarity around process and outcomes. The SRPs, they were a separate one, but we fed back on that as well. So on the SRPs, all schools with SRPs have received their service level agreement. We're still waiting for a few schools to sign them and return them to us. The funding has been set aside and is due for release. But the thing we wanted to get right was a clear process. So first of all, the schools with SRPs were very clear how they dealt with any applications. If anyone approached them for a place, what the process was and how that would be delivered. But secondly, for schools without an SRP, how would their children within EHCP, if deemed appropriate, access a place and what's the process? So we've detailed all that, we've put it in a pack, and I will guarantee that by the end of January, every school will have a pack on the panel process and the SRP process. I've been very clear with the team, we don't promise unless we can deliver. So I've been very clear about this. And the other thing that goes with that is that, as we said, the SRPs, the panels, they will receive a pack. We're happy to do drop-ins and training on that because the big focus is get this right, make sure there's clarity. So this term, rather than taking on too many things, we want to get the EHCPs right. We want to get the Capital One up and running. We want to get the SRPs, the whole process clear, the funding clear, and planning ahead for the young people for next year who can access places. The next one was the service process reviews. What I can hot off the press inform you of is that the SEN restructure was signed off by DMT on Tuesday this week. It went to CMT yesterday morning. I presented it. It's been signed off by the Chief Exec and CMT. It now starts the HR consultation process with unions and staff. So obviously in that process, there may be changes. As soon as that is agreed, I'm going to share that with all stakeholders. There's nothing to hide. So we will share that and we will start the recruitment process. And making sure that we have substantive staff rather than high numbers of agency staff should make a huge difference for the young people in the SEND service in Bracknell Forest. So that is an absolute priority for the council.
So is that going to, I mean, that sounds as if it's going to slip from your January timetable then?
Yes, we had to, there was some delay in the sign off before we could take it to DMT and CMT. That was in December, and part of it was around the inspection because a lot of things we had where things did lag. And it was actually due, if you went through democratic services, at the end of January to go to DMT and CMT, and the corporate director and myself lobbied and said, we want this as early as possible. So they brought it forward. So we are trying to move this at pace now. The position, we have some substantive staff there, but we've also got some very, very high quality agency staff. And we've started talks about whether they would consider becoming full-time staff for Bracknell Forest, those that we value and feel will work well for the council. So we've already started engaging with them. There will be some adverts. And the thing that came up before that a number of colleagues here today have raised with me, in the past when I wasn't an officer of the council, was that in the previous structure, the JDs weren't, the roles and responsibilities weren't captured clearly, and that the salary ranges that had been applied during the HR process were too low to attract quality candidates. So going through this process, because I have written quite a few JDs in my time and know where you have to place them to get the right outcome. Twice we went back to make sure. So we have got the salaries that I think we need. I think they're good salaries. I think they will attract high quality candidates, and they're in line with, if not above, all our neighbouring authorities. So I've just made it very clear, you have to pay people. If you want quality people, you pay a good salary. And that's been accepted. And as a result of that, just this part of the SEN restructure will cost the council, I think it's about an additional 38% in salary cost. The Chief Exec and CMT are very clear. It's about quality. It's about getting it right. It's having the right staff in post. So I'm hoping that's going to reassure everyone that going forward, we're not looking to make savings. We've actually invested and we want to do this properly. So I'm quite excited about that, and I will move this process as quickly as I can.
I'm sure we all wish you well with that, Cheryl, because that's been our downfall for the past 3 or 4 years, where that process has just not been managed effectively, you know, in some of our view anyway, certainly my view.
I mean, we've put additional staff in, and around that, the children's support services, which is a huge area that this SEN team sit within. I've now started a restructure of that to address other issues that have arisen over time. And again, working with the Chief Exec and the Corporate Director, identifying where we feel there's gaps in provision that may have been there many years ago, and then we found there has been a gap in the current structure. And again, the Chief Exec and CMT have been very, very supportive of that. So I've got to work quite quickly with this, but I will want to use different people as sounding boards, because we need to make sure we do not have gaps. And one of those gaps I will share with colleagues is our post-16, our pathways to adulthood provision. So we need to improve that for our young people. We've got quite a high number in that age group. And going forward, we need to make sure that we have that provision correct. We have officers that can deliver that. So it's been a massive piece of work, but I've been fully supported, and I'm really grateful to the council and of course the executive members here today. So, and he's been very supportive of this.
Thank you.
So got the other, I did go through, so EHCP's backlog. I've gone through, we do a monthly report now to the chief exec to update him. We are now end of January, all the backlog should be cleared. And from February, we should be hitting all the statutory timelines for processing EHCPs. And we've done a lot of work on trying to get to this position. So again, I don't want to make false promises, but I have told the team, if that's what they say, then that's what we must deliver. New data modelling in development. Chris Taylor, who has been producing a SEND sufficiency tool. He's invested a lot of time in doing this. And it's a piece of work that needs to be done in the council, and we are developing that now so that in the future we will have a tool and a process that we can call on. So again, it's a big piece of work. And then finally, commissioning. All providers have been quality assured, except for 2 providers who will not fill in the paperwork. And until they do, we will not place children with them. So commissioning have gone through every single provider that we use for our young people and checked all the paperwork, the safeguarding arrangements and the provision. So there was an allusion in the previous minutes about commissioning. So that piece of work is nearly completed. But if those 2 providers will not satisfy us, then we will not be able to use them. And I think those are the updates you wanted, Martin.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to comment on this, Cheryl, but you must have been surprised that some of these things weren't in place before you arrived. Let's just leave it there, shall we? Let's move on to item 4, which is proposals for the early years block on page 11 of the papers. Cherry Hall.
Yes, I'm here,
Where is
Martin.
she? She's I
am here, definitely. Yes, so this paper really goes forward from the one that we brought in December, where we looked at the proposal for the actual formula that we'd consulted with our representative group and our wider providers as well, but we hadn't been told the money in time for the last meeting. So now we do know the money that is coming forward. So we in Bracknell at 5.8 on page 13 details that we will be seeing an increase in Bracknell of 17p per hour for our 3 and 4-year-olds and 21p per hour for our eligible 2-year-olds. Our early years pupil premium is increasing by 7p per hour, and the funding rate for our Disability Access Fund, which is an annual amount for children who are in receipt of 3 and 4-year-olds who are in receipt of DLA, increases by £185 as well. So there have been some increases. I will say that the calculations have been quite tricky for this time. There's been quite a lot of work because we've not seen normal for a while. A little bit more tricky to look at our indicative rates. So David has had to look at a weighted average this time rather than the usual proxy measures that we use. And we've obviously worked in partnership with Paul to come up with the formula as it is. So it's all based on, I say, the the proposal that we put in December, so that we can make sure that we've got the right proportions in the other parts of the formula. So in our deprivation supplements and our quality supplements, we would need to use a share of the increase in the hourly rate to support those. So we will be looking that our 3 and 4-year-old rate for our providers would go up by 15p, and the 2-year-old hourly rate increased by 19p in our proposals. I'm just scrolling down. So all of that is in the different tables showing you how we're proposing to use the money. We also detail the winners and losers, so the increases, and there's only actually one provider that would see.
I was sorry for that person being the only one.
Yeah, I think the issue that we sometimes have, Martin, is when we have our childminders, they're really, really important, and I'm not putting our childminders down, but they're small numbers of children, and a childminder might only have one child in the financial year that's funded. So that sometimes skews the figures a little bit. So saying it is likely to be a childminder that is that one.
Yes.
And they may not be accessing funding this year. It's a really difficult one.
Well, it says it's an exemplar. So
yeah, absolutely. The other, so that's sort of about the actual early years funding. The other thing that I wanted to point out is around the school supplementary grant, which is 5.16 on page 17. So there is a increase from the school supplementary grant around the national insurance contributions and wider costs.
Oh, yeah.
And the paper shows that £24 per pupil allocation for early years provisions, but it is only for public sector. So our private, voluntary and independent early years providers will not receive that additional funding. Have raised that with the DfE because see, this is showing inequality where the funding formula is supposed to be quality across.
Yes.
I'm still waiting a response from the DfE. I have chased, so I contacted them before Christmas. I chased them again. I still haven't had a final response, and I've got a meeting with the DfE in about 10 days. So I will raise it again then if I haven't heard back from them. But it was really to highlight it that we're concerned that there's a disparity there. So I don't know if anybody's got any question. Don't know if anybody's got any questions about the
questions for Cherry. Sue, as our early years representative, are you happy with what you see here?
No. Okay, so I agree with a lot of what Cherry has said with regards to the increases in 3 and 4-year-old funding, 2-year-old funding, the EYPP and the DLA. I'm totally in agreement. I do feel incredibly frustrated and indeed strongly with regards to yet again what it would appear the unlevel playing field towards the maintained sector and the PVI, admittedly on a much smaller scale with less children. We have gone through at early years exactly the same as what our colleagues have in schools and colleges and other educational establishments, but with far less resources. At early years we didn't receive any support, and I can only tell you our costs in that, as you can imagine, have increased significantly. We've had no help whatsoever with regards to staff costs, and certainly the continued staff shortages that we're experiencing at the moment. A few years back, the single funded formula was brought in to try and give that level playing field for maintained and the PVI. The PVI sector, we have higher overheads than what the maintained sector do, and it would appear that £24 that actually isn't being considered for the PVI, and the fact that it states on the paper that that's to help with increases in national insurance costs. Well, any employer, whether you're PVI, whether you're maintained, you are going to have those costs increased. So what is the difference between we are all employers, we are all early years together, but yet again, in effect, the maintained sector are being given that safety blanket of an extra £24.
Yeah.
And that £24 per child doesn't sound a lot, but over a financial year, when our overheads, our rents, every cost has gone up, we're grateful for any increase in government funding. But I'm sure you'll agree, historically over the years, our funding has been and remains inadequate for the valuable service that we offer to education. If we don't get this right in early years, in the foundation of a child's life, we have to install the sound foundations in order for them to succeed for the rest of their lives. Confidence, separation from parents and carers, independence, all of the basic skills that we do in early years, a child has to have before they can even think about learning to read, write, phonics. You have to make sure that they're installed in the child in the first instance. So I think there is frustration. I've sought comments, colleagues as well, and it is, communal, that we do think it remains incredibly unfair. And I think I'd also go as strongly to say that if we remain as a PVI sector so inadequately underfunded, in 5 years' time, Bracknell Forest, along with other boroughs in the country, will not have a PVI sector, because we cannot keep swallowing up these costs when the majority of our children are funded and we have no other means of bringing in any additional monies.
Thank you, Sue. That was a very impassioned statement. I'm just going to ask Paul or Gareth if there's any weight that we can bear to Cherry's protestations to the DFE. Is there anything we should be doing? Gareth, I'm going to look at you first.
Sue, I'm listening, and I absolutely get what you're saying, because I can go right back to when Bracknell Forest was established as a unitary authority. And I think, Martin, you remember at the time it was very much about mixed diverse provision and actually what you provide within the sector. What I think has happened is that in a bid to try and help parents and families by putting significantly additional money, for parents to decide and use in terms of provision, that it's become very, very prescribed and very difficult. So I am more than happy to build on any evidence, Sue, that you can give to Cherry, that I will put together a representation and seek support from James Sunderland, the MP, to make that directly through to DFE. I have absolutely no problem at all doing that, because I think you're absolutely right that there is a tipping point for any provider where it is absolutely right and proper that you make a sustainable business case for provision, and that needs to happen. Otherwise, you're right, it's going to be increasingly difficult. And not only is it going to be increasingly difficult to maintain providers, but I was doing a bit of research into this, it will then be very, very difficult to seek funding and support if you wish to start provision to fill gaps that might be left. Cherry, I think the thing that I'm interested in all of this as well is that we do sometimes have to sort of make some comments on the sufficiency of provision and the availability of places and how, the different providers are linked. But I'm more than happy to, as I say, to put an advance recommendation together, because I think it's important that the DFE understands the indirect consequences of what I think were some well-intentioned steps to support families, and I think that's where I am. But I'm very versed and very aware about the number of providers and things that are going on. But I'm interested, Sue, in any comments that you might have at this point, if you think that would be a useful and helpful way to advance this.
Yeah, that would be really useful. Thank you, Gareth. I think, the government have been fantastic, the 30 hours for family, the 2 funding that's being offered, this is all fantastic. But what they haven't taken into account is the cost of delivering that to providers and the increased costs. The final thing I'd like to say is with regards to recruitment. I've already heard, from Cheryl about quality pay and good salaries. We would love to be able to pay our nurse practitioners, nursery managers, you know, really wages well above the national living wage. But to this day, and obviously they are increasing quite significantly in April, we are not able to pay the salaries that we want to. We are not able to retain, because they will then go to the maintained sector, because we will train them, we will get them through apprenticeship, and then as soon as they're qualified, they'll go off to the maintained sector because their salaries are higher.
No, and that's a really good point. And yeah, I mean, Martin and Sue, more than happy to make those points and pull together. And so, as you have access to my email address, if there are some key points you want me to make, feel free to email me them directly, and I'll discuss them with Cherry, and then I'm happy to put together a response. But could I just say, I think, Martin, what we should say at the start, I absolutely value what the sector brings to early years in Bracknell Forest, the quality and the flexibility. And I think, you know, as has been the case for many years, that's not something we wish to lose. But we recognise, you know, that the capacity and other challenges facing us. So, yes, if you want to contact me, more than happy to take that up.
Can I just comment as well there, Gareth, just with you mentioning about quality? I think it's worthwhile saying that we've got 2 settings who've yet to have an Ofsted inspection because they're quite new, but the rest, we're 100% good or better in our early years providers in our PVI sector. And I think that's a real, you know, really shows how hard our
and I think we need to include that in any representation, Cherry. I think it's really, really important that we actually highlight and bring that out.
I'm sure everybody on the forum is supportive of this message. Is that right? Are we all as one on this? Yeah.
I think for once, Martin, it would be nice in early years not to feel like the poor relations of education, because we work incredibly hard.
We recognise that.
And it's lovely to hear that it's recognised, but sometimes, you know, when we're in this situation every day, Martin, we don't feel like that. And I know I'm not just speaking on behalf of myself as the principal of 2 nurseries. This is across, particularly in the PVI sector, and it is devastating. It's so frustrating.
I think, Sue, to reassure you about one thing, I mean, it was only last year? Yes, it was only the end of last week. I had a meeting, you know, and Cherry says, well, a very, very clear focus meeting with a consultant from the LGA working on our early years approach. And it is absolutely key. Providers are absolutely key to that early development and support from children. And we know in Bracknell Forest, there are big areas and big numbers of children that benefit from this to get to a child-ready approach to going to school. And we need all that to work because we have a very, very diverse family base.
Okay.
We need all to work together. So I'll take that on. I'm going to have to switch my video off, Martin, because I'm just getting a lot of interference on this, but certainly we'll work with Cherry to take that forward. Okay.
Well, I'm going to suggest that let's turn to, are there any other comments that people want to make on this now? Okay, well, let's move to the recommendations then. And I'm going to suggest that we add a recommendation. I'm not quite sure, Derek's usually the master of doing this, but I would like to add into that block of recommendation the forum notes with concern the lack of a supplementary grant for the private, voluntary and independent
Agreed.
sector. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll talk with Derek at some point about how we build that in, but
yeah,
is everybody agreeable with that?
Can I ask, Martin, that you might wish to add to that, and we'll make appropriate representations to the DFE?
Yeah.
By the executive member, I'm more than happy for that to go in.
Okay.
So that gives an accountable action.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's just turn to the recommendations that we've got then. We're asked to agree that for the 2022-23 financial year, the leader of the council sets the early years dedicated schools grant income budget at 7.98 million, and that the funding rates in the early years funding formula are as set out in table 5, and the proposed budgets are set out as in appendix 1. Is everybody agreeable with that? Yeah, I'm seeing assent. Thank you very much. Thanks, Cherry, and thanks to Sue for your input on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So shall we move to agenda item 5 then? Proposals for the schools block and the CSSB, which is on page 23. Paul, I'm guessing this is over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Martin. This is another annual budget paper, so I think members will be familiar that we go through a number of stages to build up to a final set of proposals, and that's what's in front of you in this paper. So it does repeat some of the decisions you've considered and made earlier, but it's here to bring it all into one paper so you can see everything together. What it does have this time for the first time is the confirmed implications from the October 21 census update, because the DfE have to verify and validate that data before it's then released for budget purposes. So we have that data now, and you'll see from the paper there has been a big increase again in the additional educational needs factor eligibilities in Bracknell Forest School. So that's mainly around free school meals eligibility and things like English as additional language support. So those sort of factors have increased significantly again. And overall, the impact of that is that the budget gap that we're facing is £510,000 if we implement all of the proposals along the strategy that has been approved to this point. And we would normally expect the gap to be between £200,000 and £300,000, and that would normally be associated with the costs of the diseconomy funding in support to new schools, which there is some reserves to finance that effectively. So what we have now is an additional pressure, but with the way that the government funding system works for local authorities, our funding will still be based on the eligibilities in October 20, and our funding will not be increased to reflect the new eligibilities now apparent at 21, but we do have to fund schools on the basis of those eligibilities at 21. So the lagged funding system in this instance obviously reflects an additional unfunded cost pressure at this late stage of the budget setting process. So that's made the resolution of the budget that much more difficult. And what the paper is proposing, that there is a £510,000 funding gap. The Executive Director of Finance has reviewed the availability of balances. We've got just over £900,000, and his view is in order to set a sensible budget with a sufficient level of balances for any future risks, that should be at least £500,000. So that does limit our drawdown from reserves to about £400,000, and obviously the £510,000 gap is larger than that. So in order to, as I say, to make a reasonable sound budget, the Director of Resources wants to retain that £500,000 worth of balances, and is proposing therefore that we can use the remaining £182,000 of balances that the council's put forward out of the £1 million, that there's a drawdown of a further £174,000 from the accumulated surplus balances that are held in the school's budget. So that's the total from reserves, and there will be a remaining shortfall of £154,000. And the proposal is that that would be recovered through funding schools at 99.75% of the funding rates in the national funding formula, compared to what the council gets from the DfE. And that is basically linking the additional cost from this the census update, that we're not getting funding through our DSG. So there's no money in the council's allocation to pay for that, but it's got to be paid out as well at this point in time. So that we're not in a position through our funding allocation to fully fund at the DfE rates. So the proposal is a 99.75% value is applied to each of those factors. So that's the proposals in this paper. And looking just at that sector of money, that would result in an average increase in per pupil funding of 2.7%, and that's around the level you'd expect when the funding settlement from the government is generally to increase most factors in the national funding formula by 3% and some by 2%. So you would expect an increase between those two levels, and obviously ours is around 2.7%. The other thing to bear in mind is what was touched on in the last paper, is there is this new school supplementary grant that's been allocated specifically to public sector organisations to help cover the health and social care levy, which is the 1.25% national insurance increase, and also other increases in costs. So there's a new grant come out. There's some details in the paper around that. An initial calculation of that indicates that schools will get around £2.4 million through that, and that's equivalent to an average increase in per pupil funding of 3%. So that's a bigger increase in resources through that grant than will be coming through the normal DFE settlement through the DSG. But taken together, that's going to be an average increase in per pupil funding of 5.7%. Obviously, along with the extra income, we do know that costs will be increasing next year. And obviously, at this stage, it's really, really difficult to assess that with any degree of accuracy. So we know that, for example, there'll be there's a teachers' pay award due for September 22. There wasn't one in 21. We've still got the local government pay awards outstanding from April 21, and there'll be another one in April 22. There's the national insurance increase, etc. So there's a range of cost pressures that are set out in that paper, and the assumptions that we're suggesting are appropriate at this point in time, which is around a 2% increase in pay for the next year's pay awards. And if those assumptions come through, together with a general inflationary increase of 4%, reflecting the current increase in prices, we would expect school budgets to go up school costs to go up between 3.7 and 4.2%. So what the final increase will be heavily influenced by the final pay awards, and obviously that we're a long way off from knowing what they are. So they could be higher, they could be lower, but at this point in time, we're suggesting 2%. So on the face of it, it looks like there is sufficient funding to cover those costs. Now, there's not a huge gap, but it is very much dependent and influenced by the fact of how those pay awards come through. So, I mean, I think that's all I'd really want to draw out from that. Much of the issues have been presented before. There's just an update on the data, which obviously has a detrimental adverse impact on the balance in the budget. And obviously, we're looking for some agreement to the proposals tonight, and then the leader of the council will make final decisions on the budget next Tuesday, and obviously will be reflecting on what's decided here as well. So I think that's all I would like to say on this paper. So if anyone has any questions, I'll be doing my best to answer them.
Any questions for Paul? Well done, Paul. Paper with no questions. That's good.
Yeah, I take that every time.
Yeah, and we all understand it all, of course. I mean, it's not a lack of understanding. It's, you know, we're with you, I think is the message. Are we sure there's nothing there? Right, well, let's go to the recommendations then on page 24.
I think Keith is trying to come in, Martin.
Oh, Keith, good. Where are you? Yes, Keith, please.
Sorry, Martin. Yeah, I think Paul has been very thorough, and he's explained that, you know, based on the information he's got this time. But my question is, and I think we're all quite concerned about the rising costs, and there are some uncertainties ahead. And you've mentioned pay being one of them. So is there any opportunity to look at this again if further information does become available and there is some more detail over the next few months?
Well, nothing's going to change in terms of the income we get now. So that's fixed now. So that's not going to change. All that will change is as the cost pressures get firmed up, and that will be different school by school as well, depending on different, you know, staffing structures, what different types of contracts you've got in place, that sort of stuff. So I'm not sure what we can do moving forwards, because it would normally be a case of, you know, that's the funding we've got, that's the amount we can afford to pay. And then each school makes decisions. You know, you don't have a choice over the pay awards, etc. But you'll make choices around how you spend the money. At this point in time, it does look like there'll be more. The increase will be greater than the cost increases, but the uncertainty, the level of uncertainty at the moment is obviously much higher than it's normally been. So we can't be that confident in that prediction. But right now, it does look like that there will be a higher level of increase in income than expenditure. I'm not sure there's anything we can do during the course of the year if that changes. Obviously, we'd like to be kept informed about that. But as I said, the government will have they've allocated all their money. But it's I guess it's like the early years issues that was raised earlier. If there's something that emerges that we're concerned about, then that's something that we can take forward through our normal routes, and possibly through the executive member or any other route that we think appropriate at that time. But I think for now we need to wait and see, as you said, what emerges in the next few months.
Is that okay, Keith? Yeah. Are there any other questions or comments for Paul? No, I can't see any. So shall we go to the recommendations then? I don't want to read this all out. If we look at 3.1, in its role as the representative body of schools and other providers of education and childcare, the forum requests that the leader of the council agrees the following for the 2022-23 schools budget. And that is items 1 to 7. Is there any dissent about any of those things in 1 to 7, or is everybody happy with those? I'd rather not go through them individually. Okay, I see assent for that. And as decision maker, the schools forum, that the arrangements in place for the administration of central government grants are appropriate. The financing and budgets for the growth fund as set out are set out in Annex 1. And the budgets to be centrally managed by the council on behalf of schools are as set out in Annex 2. Is everybody content with that? Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Paul, for that. So shall we move to item 6 then, which is the proposals for the 2022-23 local authority budget. Paul, I guess you're going to talk through this one as well, are you?
Yep, I'll try and keep this one brief as well. Thank you, Martin. So yeah, this is part of the annual consultation that the council's seeking views on the budget proposals for next year. It covers both revenue and capital. It's a familiar format of the paper that we bring here, so hopefully it makes a bit more sense each year to you that you see it. In essence, basically, there are 5 parts of building up the budget. So we start off looking at the commitment budget. So what are those areas that we are already paying for? What's our base budget, and are there any changes need to be done to that to reflect part year decisions last year? So does anything need to be added in as extra or taken out? So those adjustments are done at the start of the process. Then the next stage is to look at what sort of income we're getting in. So that's generally around government grants. So at this stage, sorry, I should have said at the start, at this stage, these proposals were issued before we had the local government finance settlement. So it was nothing had been confirmed in terms of our income from the government. So we were making broad assumptions based on general statements rather than specific to each local authority. So at that stage, we will making assumptions around what our the business rates changes would be, what sort of income we'd be getting through some of the other main grants. There was an additional grant funding to support local authorities coming out of the pandemic, particularly around adult social care. So we're making assumptions around that sort of income as well. Things like the New Homes Bonus, which is a big grant for us, so local authority that has a lot of developments, and some of the other health-related grants. So I have to make estimates around the income, and then what other commitments we're changing during the course of the year. So what sort of service pressures and developments were emerging, and they're set out by each directorate in the main council paper, but this one focuses very much on the pressures being put forward by the People Directorate, and most of those are around social care, particularly adults, again, that link into the extra grant that recognises the pressures on that service going forward into next year. There are some other pressures in there as well, and they're in Annex B. And then the other part of it is the service economy. So what areas can we actually reduce funding through reduced demand, or are there other areas that we can make some efficiencies or some cost reductions? And again, they are set out for the People Directorate at Annex C. Again, there's not a huge amount there. There's £472,000. And again, most of those centre around social care functions. So there's not a huge amount in education's perspective in these proposals, but obviously they're open there for you to raise any comments if you have any, please. And then the final part of it is the provision for the inflation. So again, what we were just talking about, a lot of uncertainty around that. Our provision for inflation will be a lot higher in 22-23 than it traditionally has been, because of the effect of the expectation that inflation will increase, and pay awards will be in place again next year, because there was no provision for the 21-22 pay award, because there was a public sector pay freeze when we set that budget for last year. So there's 2 pay awards to fund for the local government sector in there. So overall, that package brings together proposals that would result in, at that stage, an estimated funding gap of around £3 million. And like we just talked about on the schools budget paper, the way that the council can manage that is, well, part of it is by drawing down from balances, and there's around £5.8 million available in balances to support pressures, and also there can be an increase in the council tax. So that's the way the council's looking at balancing out that budget. And then the second part of the paper looks at capital, and again that just looks about what proposals we have in terms of making investments or new developments in capital assets, and making sure we meet our statutory duties around management of those assets. And again, that's set out by different directorates, and this paper concentrates on highlighting the areas around the education sector, and that can be seen at Annex D, shows the money, and Annex E gives a bit more information about what each of those schemes actually mean in terms of what the development is proposed to be. So I think that, as I say, I don't think there's too much to draw out on that. There's a lot of detail in there again. So I'd be happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Questions or comments for Paul? I mean, we're asked to comment on this, aren't we? As a schools forum, I think there's a requirement for the schools forum to be consulted on the local authorities budget. I'm looking at Paul for guidance there.
It doesn't have to be, but it's good practice, and it's something that the council wants to do. So it's just getting some information. Yes, obviously get some feedback if appropriate on these proposals.
I mean, you know, I've just got a couple of things on page 53, which I'd like to comment on. I mean, first of all, we, as a forum, we note the continued support from the council for the cost towards the cost of school places. There was that extra fund that was put in a couple of years ago, and we should continue to recognise that. But more concerning are paragraphs 5.28, 29 and 5.30, which are essentially about the high needs block deficit. And I don't know about you, but I just read that again today. And it suddenly occurred to me that's from the start of the next financial year. We're in 2022-23 already. And the payback period begins in April 2023, presumably. And, you know, £20 million, well, I don't know. It just seems a huge concern for Bracknell Forest, quite frankly. And even with our best efforts, I can't see how we can quickly dispose of that debt. Well, okay.
Martin, I think Keith and Stuart have got their hands up.
Sorry, Keith. Yeah, first of all.
Thanks, Martin. As you know, as you probably worked out, I didn't get the heads up on this, and I regret actually not going through these papers before today. I just want to make a quick comment. I need to speak to someone about the particular project that relates to Garfield to get an update on where we are. We haven't received an update. There's only been informal conversations, and I think it's fair to say, and I've checked with my site manager this afternoon, that those informal conversations don't reflect what is set out in this paper. And I think that is relevant for the schools forums up here, but I appreciate these are wrong.
Okay. How do we take that forward? Paul, I'm looking to you for guidance. Will you?
That's very. I didn't hear very well what Keith said, but I think it's best if Cheryl responds to that particular project. You're right to respond on that, Cheryl.
Keith, it was really difficult to hear you. It was very muffled. I was trying to work out if it was my speakers or something. I couldn't catch what you were saying. I do apologise.
Shall I try again? I don't know.
Yeah, that's better. That's much better.
Yeah,
thank you.
I don't know what happened there.
Oh, thank you.
What did I say? Firstly, I said Martin, you may have worked out that I didn't have any heads up on this paper, and I regret actually not studying these papers before today. The other thing that I would say is that I need to speak to someone to get an update on this particular project. Now, whilst I appreciate that this is a draft proposal, so I understand that, the informal conversation, the most recent informal conversations that we have had, and I've checked with my site manager during this meeting, don't reflect what is set out in this paper. I just want to make that point.
Okay. Well, Cheryl, I'm hoping you'll take that up with Chris for us then, please.
Yeah. Keith, what we'll do is set up a meeting, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I was going to try and contact Chris tomorrow, actually.
He is around. He's not on leave, but I without checking his diary, I can't tell you.
But I do appreciate these are draft proposals.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for raising that, Keith. Stuart?
Yeah, sorry, can I just confirm that obviously these proposals were put together in November, December time, so something may have moved on since then, but obviously if you get that follow-up meeting, that'll be much more clarity on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's helpful to know, Paul. Thank you.
Can I help on the principle of this, Martin? I can't, of course, comment on the individual proposal as a governor, but these are effectively budget estimates which are pulled together in the November time, and then you basically essentially have a set sum of money and there's an assessment and understanding of what might be needed. I think where on this and on other projects where there might be some discrepancy stroke confusion coming in is as plans and ideas are refined on capital capital programs, the numbers will change to better reflect the resource that's available and what can be achieved and what can be done well. So I think you see some flexibility. So what I suspect we will need to, Cheryl, follow up on with Chris and others is how that will impact the individual projects within that. But my understanding is all the listed ones, Keith, that would include this one, there is a commitment to fund to complete to a satisfactory, not satisfactory, not to an appropriately good level, I think is probably the best word. And it could well be that different ideas have come out since then because, there's a fair bit of balancing and trading on that to ensure that we get the right outcome.
Can I also say, I suppose because this is a public paper, if someone does see that, then they might draw conclusions, and they may be the wrong conclusions because we certainly don't agree with what's set out in this paper reflects the conversations we've most recently had, and they've only been informal or impromptu. We don't know where we are with this project.
I think, Keith, you're seeing a paper there which went out for consultation before Christmas and therefore was prepared quite considerably before Christmas, which is why I think, Paul, you're absolutely right. There might be some changes, but I'm going to leave that to Cheryl and you to follow up following this meeting.
Yeah, I suppose it's important that it doesn't, Keith is talking about the public domain. This will be a paper that is agreed by the council at some point. So we probably need to get it right before then, if we're not too late. No,
I'm confident that will happen, Martin. This is an iterative process, and quite often the actual amount spent on individual projects and how projects are achieved over the 12 months following the setting of the budget, there's variation within that amount. But what the capital budget sets out is the financial parameters in which the totality of projects will work. And then I think, it's getting the best that we can from each one.
I don't want to speak for him, but I don't think Keith is arguing about the financial amount. I think it's some of the words in the paper.
Yeah, and I'd agree that I think, Joel, they need to be looked into before the paper's finalised. I agree with that.
Okay, thank you. Roger, did you want to come in on the same point or?
No, it's a different point, actually. Sorry, do you want me to sort of come back?
Well, if it doesn't relate to Garth Hill, let me go to Stuart next, and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
Mine doesn't relate to Garth Hill either.
No, I didn't think it would. Go on, Stuart, you go.
It's just a query, an observation. It's probably for Gareth on page 55 about reserves. With an economist hat on, those reserves look very healthy, more than double the the size of the minimum requirement, and that suggests prudent and sensible financial management with a taxpayer and tax spender hat on at the end of a pandemic. It seems to be a large reserve if there are services which are struggling, and that would be the only point I'd make.
Can I come back on that? The phraseology we use is a glide path. So what we aim to do over the 12 months is, in generally setting a budget we think we can balance, is to use reserves as we need to actually help transition from one service to a position to another, to account for any sudden shocks that might occur without actually delivering those services. So yeah, they are very healthy balances, but my gut feeling is that it had to be put together as it did before we got the final numbers from central government. So what you might find is that if there's a little bit more money coming through in the final local government settlement, that will mean taking less money for reserves, but that means we then have the ability in year to actually respond to things that are coming out. For example, we're not clear at this stage to what extent the impact of COVID will continue into the next financial year on the government's provision. And so, for example, it could well be that there are moves to actually support those in financial hardship through council tax support and things like that are not at this point in time itemised in the budget proposal. So absolutely take the point, but I think technical expression we use is a glide path where we try to make sure there's sufficient money to avoid shocks to the system. And since 1997, so in the last 25 years, I think we pretty well managed that. But yeah, it is a large number, but I think it will actually come out in the wash over the next 12 months.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Roger, and then Grant.
I felt that you've made several really important points tonight early on in terms of high needs, which I fully agree with. But in the comments that you've just made about the sum of, I think you said something like 20 million, I'd like to know where we're going with this in order to try and address this issue, and what information we should expect to hear that means that if we have to pay that sum back, what the plan is and how we are going to manage that. I thought that was a vital point, and I just wonder where we are with this, because as you say, it's not too long away till we're supposed to start paying back a huge sum of money. It matters greatly.
Paul or Cheryl, do you want to respond?
I mean, what happened was that obviously this is a national issue that is reflective, our position is reflective in many other areas across the country, and the government recognised this. So they put in place this 3-year period where they said that we recognise budgets can overspend, but you don't need to take account of that liability in your accounts and set in your own budget, so you don't have to put aside some money to cover that off. We'll do that for you while you work towards a position over that 3-year period where you are making your income and expenditure balance off for 23-24. So the plan was over these 3 years, authorities would get to a position, so 23-24, that they were balancing their budget. So their annual income was being matched with their annual expenditure. And then there would be a further piece of work, further discussion, some further decisions around what happens with any accumulated deficit at that stage. So that part of it hadn't been addressed or hadn't been dealt with in any way by the government. But the point was that local authorities were basically given 3 years to forget about any debts. Obviously, that's a very generalised term, just to concentrate on balancing your budget going forward. And then there'd be a further piece of work to work out what happens with the debt. So we don't know what that is going to be just yet. All we're hearing now is that the government have not really made any really formal statements on this. They're just saying that local authorities should assume that the debt liability will transfer to local authorities on the 1st of April 2023. But there's going to be a lot more to emerge on this over the coming months, I'm sure. But the original expectation was concentrate on balancing your budget from 23-24, and then the rest of it will be dealt with, will be looked at later. And there's no real update on that.
Sorry, can I just add, Martin, to what Paul said? If actually they follow through with the actions as they set them out at the moment, there will be a lot of local authorities in significant financial difficulty. So I think there is again going to be, to use that expression, some sort of arrangement and a longer term transition. But actually, as a taxpayer, I mean, I think going back to something you said, Stuart, I think ultimately, if a council incurs expenditure, there should be a measure of accountability for what that money looks like. So I get the backing principle, but I think how the transition works, the period of time and how that works is going to be important. But, you know, that I think, Martin, you made some very good points about the high need at the start. I absolutely take them on board. It's about making sure that the plans that we have mean that we're on course to actually try and move this to that position over a period of time. But it might not be 2024, you know, and we won't be the only local authority in that position, will we, Paul? I mean, I think, you know, this is a big issue. So, you know, we'll see how that pans out.
I mean, from my perspective, we still seem a long way away from a balanced budget.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
We're talking about 2.6 million this year, aren't we, Paul? And, you know, it just seems, you know, I appreciate what Cheryl said at the beginning. And I know that we've made efforts to try and reduce it, but it just seems to grow and grow and grow.
Yeah. And I think, you know, going back to comments made at the previous meeting, until we're absolutely clear and confident about all the commissioning decisions, how that service works, and there's a huge piece of work to be done and is being done on that, you know, we're not going to see that step change. But, you know, I have this confidence. It's not delusional. It's a genuine confidence that with the approach being taken both in this and SEN, that we're going to see some significant changes, because we're actually in a very different position to where we were. We actually understand what the drivers are now and have done for some time. And once you do that, you can actually affect change reasonably quickly. And it needs to be done with families, with parents, and working in the best interests of young people. And we need to recognise then that we, you know, you can't chop and change. We need to evolve and change the service we offer for those young people. And that means there's going to be a lag between decisions being made now and actually the ultimate impact on both the high needs and indeed actually the SEN budget going forward.
Okay, thank you. Grant, are you on the same point, or are you?
No, just something different.
Cheryl, well, can I go to Cheryl then? Because I guess Cheryl wants
Okay. Two points. Keith, I have emailed Chris Taylor for you, attached the page, detailed concerns, and asked him to make sure he's available to talk to you tomorrow. So please get back to me if you hear nothing. Secondly, following on from Paul Clark and from Gareth, the outline, we do have a high needs block project group, and we have identified the areas of work that need to be done to bring that deficit budget down. And all the work that we're doing, we're very clear now where the issues are. We just need to make sure that we have the right processes in place and that we're addressing them. And we're very, very clear that it's not a quick fix within the next 12 months, but within the next 2 to 3 years, we will be in a substantially far better position to address this deficit budget. So yeah, I just appreciate the support from colleagues here at Schools Forum, because we know it's not something we can do on our own, and we need to work with people because there are processes and systems that need changing to address this. So thank you.
Cheryl. Grant, over to you.
Thank you. Hopefully just a quick minor observation. So page 53, 5.26, just to mention about the cost of new schools. I was quite surprised at the line that says that new schools will need to open at the start of development the overcapacity in primary. I would be surprised if we're opening up any new schools while there is, we are
agreed.
Asking other schools. So perhaps that might be just need to be amended. I imagine it might have been something from a previous paper that's been brought over.
Can I say, Grant, on that might refer to the fact that there are some classes that we can't stop opening as well as new schools. But I think, Paul, if you can take that back, that would be helpful, just wording on that.
Yeah, exactly. It's not meant to mean we're opening new schools. It's meant the ones that previously opened, they opened in advance.
Yeah. So, for example, there was agreement with a number of schools that we would provide classroom fit out as part of the agreement in a phased fashion, and that incurred costs, Samantha, but it's not about opening new schools. Absolutely not about opening new schools, Grant. You know, no matter how. Oh, by the way, I should say as well, just on this, Martin, generally speaking, in terms of schools, in discussions around the budget, huge support for continuing the school improvement work. And a huge congratulations to all the schools in Bracknell Forest, because with over 94% of our schools now rated as good or outstanding, that puts us in the top 30 local authorities in the country. Tremendous effort. But the great thing that means is that councillors are prepared to continue to support school improvement, because they can see the tangible impact it has when working with schools on delivering good education for everyone. So to everyone on the call, I just absolutely, just fantastic. And in the light of COVID and everything that's happened. So, that's an example where actually a funded initiative that goes beyond that which many local authorities do yields a really good positive result for schools, and actually the local authority working together means that will continue to be funded and supported in the budget. And I think that's what you see in the numbers. So, big thanks to everyone. Just makes it a bit easier for me to sell the whole principle as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, Paul, I don't know whether you can give me a bit of advice on this, but how do we feed back any comments that we've got? Do you want something formal from us? I mean, I think, on
the budget proposals, you mean? Yeah. Is there anything you specifically want to raise? I mean, I know Keith's raised the specific issue about his project. I don't know if you want to raise that back through this route, or that's something Keith does.
Can I ask and suggest, Martin, that people feedback, factual comments and expressions through Paul, Paul then can share them with me. We can make sure they feature as part of the budget consultation wrap up.
I wrote something down, when I was going through the papers, and it is about those 3 paragraphs about the debt. I wrote down Schools Forum notes with continuing concern the projected high needs block cumulative deficit at the end of the 2022-23 financial year, and Bracknell Forest's ability to manage this. Roger's nodding. Is everybody happy for us to feed that back? It's frightening. It's only, it's next year.
No, fair comments. And I'm happy to speak to those as well. Martin, I'm really sorry at this point. I do need to give my apologies, but if there was anything in the remainder of the meeting that needs to be raised with me, please feel free to forward them, any concerns or questions to me directly. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gareth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The last thing, just going back to the high needs, not the high needs paper, the early years paper. Derek has done the business and drafted something. I don't know whether people have seen it in the comments. Derek's wording is that the forum notes with concern the lack of a dedicated grant for PVI providers, and asks the executive member for children, young people and learning to make representations to the DFE about addressing this omission in relation to a vital sector accordingly. I'd be happy to sign up to that. Is everybody else happy? Yeah. Sue, I hope that feels supportive.
Yes. Thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you. Is there any other business? I don't think there is. We don't usually do other business, do we? Thank you very much, everybody, for this afternoon. Nice to see you all. See you next time. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right.
Yeah, all right, Martin. Yeah, how are you?
Switched off, Derek.
Hello. Yes, I'm still here.
Are we going live?
Have you switched off the live stream?
No, he says it's still on there.
Hang on. It's now gone. Just having some technical issues at my end.